This unit included several different art historical periods, which overlapped confusingly. Basically, know that Rococo and Enlightenment art appeared in the 18th century, the second half of the 18th century, that neoclassical art was the art of revolution and democracy, and that the Napoleonic Wars and industrialization helped usher in Romanticism in the early 19th century. Realism was a mid-19th century phenomenon. Monet and Rodin are a little hard to classify, but they're later 19th century and really the first modernists in our required works list. Got all that? As always, any of the matching quizzes I've posted for this unit are fair game. There are also a lot of questions about art historical periods, so don't skip that matching quiz, okay? There are also several attribution questions. In case you were wondering, the work on the right can be attributed to Walt Disney. As always, I've scrounged questions from as many sources as I can find, including old AP tests, College Board practice questions based around the new curriculum, and various review sources. We're all still feeling our way with this new curriculum. So, what is the artist's political intent? How does he achieve his political and artistic goals? What is the content of this painting? In other words, what's going on? What are the prominent stylistic elements of this painting? What method was used to produce this print? And I don't think I mentioned this, but it turned up in one of the practice questions I found. What kind of stone is used in this process? You can look that up. Why did this technique spread in the 19th century? Who was buying these prints and why? This work includes a number of cultural references. What are they? So here are some more miscellaneous questions, and some more, and still more. I talked briefly about this painting and painter in my Rococo Art podcast. Who was a contemporary painter with a similar set of patrons but rather different political views? And who were these patrons? When and where did these two artists paint? There are a lot of questions about this painting, including a question about its date from an old AP exam that's more specific than usual. We really don't know just how often specific dates will appear on the new AP test, but you were warned about this one, right? So what's the story behind this painting, and what was the artist's intent in painting this particular narrative? What art historical period does it belong to, and what characteristics of this period show up in the work? What was innovative about this artist's painting style? What is the artist's nationality? Warning, for this and other works you'll see on this review podcast, some of the questions about style will require you to look closely at the work and use your new analytical tools. In other words, I haven't given away all the questions or all the answers. So this is no longer a required work, but it actually shows up on a practice question for the new curriculum. So, what art historical period does it represent? How is the painting composed? And what earlier era does this harken back to? What earlier art historical period? What other subjects interested this painter? What art historical period is this building associated with? The design of this building was heavily influenced by what high Renaissance Venetian architect, and what building designed by that architect? Now, neither the Italian architect nor his building remains on the list, but the influence is so strong that I wouldn't be surprised to see some variation of the question show up in the AP test anyway, on the theory that you need to know it to understand this work. What other art historical period, or really historical period, did the architect deeply admire and seek to emulate? And where and how did he develop these interests? And see some representative examples. You need to know something about this fellow's career. In what ways was this building distinctly American, despite the European influences? What were the architect's concerns and objectives as he designed and built this house? By the way, and don't take this hint the wrong way, you need to think about it, but what role, if any, did slavery play in the design? I'm pretty sure your reading talks about this. Who is the patron of this work? Which other works in the course incorporate water in their design? Warning, this is an accept question. What room faced these gardens, and how was it designed to take advantage of the view? Which of our works from earlier units uses architecture and landscape to portray political power? By the way, I think this is a hard question, but I think if you look at the examples, one of them will have a similar kind of political power. So these are works from two different series. The one on the left is our required work. And what series is it part of? What art historical period is this artist associated with? And actually, I should note, he spans more than one period, but the required work you see here is pretty clearly associated with just one. What was the method used to produce these works? And remember that it's a question with multiple answers. Why does the artist only show the barrels of the rifles in the work on the left? I think you'll be able to figure that one out. Well, no surprise that this one shows up. You should know it. What was the art historical period? The narrative content, in other words, what's the story? What was the artist's intent? Who commissioned this painting, and when and where was it shown? Or was it? Hint, there is some serious irony here. The dramatic lighting channels what earlier artist? And you know the answer to that question. What story did this series tell, and where did it come from? Who bought these works? Who was the intended audience? You need to know what the term didactic means, by the way. If you don't know it, look it up. What artist and artistic school influenced this later work? What's the historical context of this work? What kind of painting most influenced the artist? What does the iconography tell us about the subject of the work? What are those bound rods he's resting his hand on? What do they represent? Now, this isn't a required work either, but I talked about it in my podcast, and it makes some points that the College Board might not be able to resist. So, what painting are the men in the room ogling? And what role do women play in the scene? How did the photographer manage to capture these images? Why did the artist choose this particular setting? What is the setting? This artist focuses especially on what aspect of formal style. I talked about that a lot. What current fashion and earlier art historical periods and styles influence this work? And this is the trickiest one, but I think you should know the answer. Why did this work come under some attack from neoclassical painters, even though he was mostly one of their own? Remember that the neoclassical painters were the heirs in part to the scientific revolution. Where was this painting shown? What works helped inspire the painter, although most of those painters are probably turning over in their graves? What art historical movement is this artist associated with? This painting is paired with the one you just saw. For both works, you need to be prepared to answer basic questions about landscape painting from this art historical period, and especially its American manifestation. So again, you're getting tired of this. What is the art historical period? And what important 19th century philosopher and writer addressed similar themes, similar political and economic themes? How did this artist apply paint? And which of our other required artists applied paint in the same way? Why did this painting startle the French art world? And why was it rejected by the Academy Salon? How did the work differ from, but also how did it resemble works that did meet Academy standards? Was this painting rejected by the Academy as well? How was it painted? What earlier artist was this artist imitating, sort of? What were some of the artistic innovations of this work, and where did the artist find inspiration? Why did so many people find this work objectionable? Okay, here you need to know the content, that is the narrative, and also the story behind its commissioning and reception by its patrons. There's a question about how this sculptor Rodin influenced later sculptors. We haven't gotten to later yet, but I think you'll be able to figure out the answer. And to help you, here are two sculptures by a Croatian artist, early 20th century artist, who was heavily influenced by Rodin. In fact, the Rodin Museum in Paris held a special exhibition of this sculptor's work in 2012.